So we want to just harvest some of these conversations. So maybe just take a minute to look around each table, see who wants to share out a harvest.
There's legislation at all levels. There's a local level, there's a county level, there's a state level, there's a federal level. And as citizens, we can affect all of those. And the specific information, we dealt with some specific information here. For instance, legislators can file legislation right now at the state level. If you're, it might have to get transferred to a new legislator coming in to be able to be filed when the legislature convenes in early December. But the mechanisms for doing that I know quite well, and there's some other people in the room that know that quite well, and I'm more than happy to be real helpful to you if legislation is the route that you're trying to go with some change you're trying to.
All right, so I'm going to just let's file some legislation.
Yes, sir.
What that is to be determined, right?
There were some bills that were mentioned.
Was there any specific bills that you want, just like one or two that you want to call out?
One of them is funding for doing weatherization work. $5 billion of our money goes to pay for fossil fuels out of state. About 40% of that is to heat our homes. And so if we do weatherization work, we cut that down. It's one of the highest rates of return on investments that we can make. State policy, which was developed in the Baldacci era and continues to today, is to weatherize all the homes and half the businesses within 20 years of when it started about 15 years ago.
All
There
right,
was no money for
we'll
it.
just leave it there. So
What's the green bag?
one piece, one kernel, and we'll put this up so other folks can look at it as well. Let's go around tables this way.
Okay. Community control. And I think kind of like where we sort of ended with this was just talking about community control starts with a sense of community. It is hard to develop community control or really move forward on that project if people don't feel like they're part of the community or that they are empowered by their community somehow.
One thing from this table is the importance of redefining the economy to include all of the labor of caring that is actually sustaining us, which includes human labor that's often invisible and isn't measured, and it doesn't count as part of conventional economics. But then also including the labor of the non-human beings and ecosystems that sustain us.
Yeah, and so some examples would be neighbors helping neighbors, family life, cooking and cleaning and maintaining the household, and bearing the children, and making sure they're raised properly. You know, it's all labor that is absolutely essential to the economy, but it's unrecognized and devalued.
And then the other sort of practical moving forward piece, I guess, would be something about just the need to work on ourselves and take care of each other. Just that so many of our movements fall apart because of our trauma and our hurt, and we need to have that at the center of all the work we do.
And then a big part of that is recognizing how adverse the situation is that we face and how many of our relationships are not nourishing us and have become these very stark things. And so having self-compassion and collective compassion as we intentionally try to move towards reciprocal relationships.
Well, we talked a lot about what profits mean, like the assumption of what profits mean being money in our culture and all the ways we can reframe profit. We talked about pathways and structures for doing that, like what are the routing mechanisms, what are the pathways for profit. And then we talked about negative investing being a scheme that changes things. So you've got a worker co-op, you've got a community project, you can get investors that aren't just getting zero return on their investment, they're actually putting their money in it so that they know that it's going to regenerate wealth for their community for ages and ages after that. We talked about the gift economy, and what is that one? Oh, workers hiring capital rather than capital hiring workers.
Let's sit over here.
Yeah, so we were talking about energy democracy, and we were talking about how it starts with education. And so teaching our children and having in-school programs, and kids are really good at going home and nagging their parents, and we can get a lot done starting with that. We talked about having cooperative or peer support, whether it's AmeriCorps members or time bankers or other volunteers that can go out and help other people in the community to install LED light bulbs, to change their shower heads, to air seal or insulate their houses, because we have such an aging population in Maine, and there's a lot of people who aren't physically able to do these types of things in their homes, and so providing the support to do that. And then making things more affordable, and a lot of that comes down to having better financing that's accessible to everyone. And so whether it's a green bank or improved loan processes that aren't discriminatory by requiring a certain credit score, or various things like that to increase access to financing, which makes home efficiency and clean energy and electric vehicles affordable to everyone rather than just select few. Those are my highlights. And then public transportation is a critical aspect of energy democracy because transportation uses so much of our expensive fossil fuels.
Right, so our topic was universal basic income. We spent most of our time kind of discussing what it is. So some of the items we came up with were one of the need for it. I guess the one of the proposals was it's basically a subsidy that every individual receives regardless of income. Of course, individuals that end up paying more into it will end up subsidizing those individuals that are the recipients. We also brought up another variant of it called the negative income tax, which is very similar. It's not a everyone doesn't get it. It is means tested, but the only means is income.
This current group says that workers contribute to the company's major decisions. They're motivated for success because they are owners. And some of the companies use open book management so they understand what's going on in the company. That helps them make better decisions. Next steps could be making it easier to start one, to funding, infrastructure, and also the outreach initiatives so let the public know there is such a thing as a worker cooperative. Mm-hmm. And one of the ideas is to have a website called bettermainecareers.com. So they, oh, I'm looking for a job, here's a better career, and then they start reading about worker cooperatives.
So one of the notable things we kind of came up with about shifting investments is this notion of that there's a toxic shareholder primacy when shares are sort of external, and one way you can get around that is by having shares internalized through worker cooperatives or through member shares or various models like ESOPs that are structures where you have your membership having access to shares and not your sort of like anybody on the market taking advantage of your share opportunities.
And the second one was redefining the term investments from I put in money and I get more money back to I put in money and I might get the same amount of money back, I might get a little extra money back, I might get less money back, but the idea was the idea of investments is in communities and workers, in a better society rather than in how I can benefit.
Changing the conversation.